If you're looking for a war film that's going to have a lot of action, this movie is definitely not going to be it. If you're looking for something a little bit more exciting, this movie is also not going to be it. However, if you want to see some good acting between Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell, give it a shot. You might enjoy it. Devotion. A pair of U.S. Navy fighter pilots risk their lives during the Korean War and become some of the Navy's most celebrated wingmen. And if it's any indication as to how successful this movie was in conveying that information, I had no idea that these were some of the Navy's most celebrated wingmen. So if I've got to describe my experience with this movie in a sentence or phrase, I would say that aside from some moments of brilliance and the exceptional performances from Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell, this is probably one of the most forgettable movies I've seen in a really long time, which is unfortunate. I wanted to like this movie. That's just the reality I felt when walking out of it. You might feel differently, but stick around. I'll talk about why I feel that way. So let me start off with what I really enjoyed about this movie. Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell absolutely, positively ooze charisma on screen for the entire movie, carry it, and actually make it worth watching. This movie has very few redeeming qualities, and honestly, if they weren't in this film, I would recommend that you skip this movie. However, they do so well on screen that I can't help but be hooked whenever they're doing whatever they're bantering between each other. The intensity that they bring, the coldness, the warmth, every emotion, and every relationship dynamic that you feel between these two, you really buy into it. And without these two charismatic leads, this movie would have really faltered because this movie is so centered on that relationship. And if the movie couldn't have pulled off that fundamental goal, this movie I think would have been an absolute dumpster fire, and I would have definitely recommended skipping it at that point. However, Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell ultimately saved this movie, and in my book, just barely make it worth watching. However, for a general movie-going audience, I think you'll generally find it a good movie. Additionally, I did think that there were some moments of brilliance to be had in this experience. A lot of them do come from the acting from Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell and showcasing some of the hardships that they had and some of the milestones that they had in going through the Korean War together. And it really made for some bright spots in the film whenever comic relief was needed, whenever a really intense scene or bonding between the two of them was happening. There were just these flashes of moments in the movie where I'm like, man, if these scenes were just drawn out a little bit longer, it would have made this 2-hour experience just a lot more enjoyable, but it fails to capitalize on its best moments, and it ultimately feels just like shadows of potential. All right, so let me jump into what I didn't really enjoy about this movie. This movie was really boring. It is not an exaggeration to say that most of the action in this self-proclaimed war film was in the trailers. I'm not kidding. In probably the 2 hours, 10 minutes runtime this movie had, I bet you there's about 15 minutes of action at the most that was compelling. Maybe. That just really threw me off going into this movie about these two fighter pilots who are supposed to be some of the most celebrated in U.S. Navy history. And there's not really a whole lot of opportunity to showcase their talents or why they're the most celebrated. It just felt very hollow to me. And because of that, I couldn't buy into what this movie was trying to convey because half the time I didn't really know what this movie wanted to convey to me. Was it a message of the trial and tribulations of Jonathan Majors' character trying to get through the Navy to be an aviator of his class? Was it a story of the friendship between these two? The movie was just sending me mixed messages in that regard. I would say more so it's probably the latter. It's probably more so based on the relationship between these two characters. But I don't think the movie could have done a worse job at making everything interesting in that vein because there's nothing interesting about it. And to make matters worse, I don't think anything significant actually really happened to this movie up until probably between the hour to hour and a half mark. At one point, I was just kind of watching this movie and I felt myself waiting for something to happen and nothing would happen. And then finally when things started to happen, it's like this intensity, you got this intensity jolt and then it was immediately brought back down again. I'm kind of like, come on, couldn't we have just held on to it for a little while longer? It's like you're finally getting to some really good stuff and then the movie just blows past it in about 30 seconds. It was really annoying. Some of the most major milestones in the entire movie, these moments of brilliance that I talked about a little bit earlier in the pros, were quickly squashed within the screenplay within seconds. It was fascinating. I could not believe this movie's inability to hold your attention for longer than 10 seconds. I know I'm being really harsh on this movie, but I can't believe this movie was 2 hours with how boring it was. I can tell they wanted to tell the story of two awesome fighter pilots who fought for the United States. It's just the execution of it was so poor. And the thing is, with some of these major milestones throughout the movie that it does attempt to convey to us, some things happen to some of these characters where the movie's like, you should definitely care about this. And I'm like, why? Like, I didn't find myself caring about really any of these characters. Whether it be good or bad things, the movie failed to get me on board with any of them. And when I asked myself the fundamental question, why do I care? The movie just failed to answer it at every single turn. Was this story heartbreaking? Absolutely. Did it go about telling it in a manner that it was exciting and made for a good movie? I'd say absolutely not. I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. I'm going to say it's mediocre. I barely recommend giving it a shot. If you're looking for a war film that's going to have a lot of action, this movie is definitely not going to be it. If you're looking for something a little bit more exciting, this movie is also not going to be it. However, if you want to see some good acting between Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell, give it a shot. You might enjoy it. And trust me, I take no pleasure in being so negative about a movie. It's just this movie didn't have it. Friends, thank you so much for watching another movie review. If you like this or found it helpful, I'd be honored if you consider clicking the like button, clicking these end cards above, or the links down in the description below for your viewing pleasure. Once again, I've been Bryson. Until next time, have a great day.